had all of the best available to them, but they weren't spoiled with what the best was. And what I would say is that and we don't have a lot of parents here that have kids at home now. I do have a couple, I think, 3, 4, maybe, that have teenagers at home or younger than teenagers at home. The job of a parent is to form the character early in life and then begin to take the restrictions off a little bit so that what's been put into them can be let out. You cannot isolate your kids from the world. They're going to get it. You say, well, we had a movement, and it's still there, and I'm okay with it, where parents thought the thing to do is put your kids in a Christian school and you'd isolate them from the world. The truth of the matter is all they do is get worldly Christians influencing them instead of the world, because the world's everywhere. Okay? And so the job of the parent is to form the character of a child when they're young, and then as they move into those teen years, begin to back off of some of the restrictions so that character can be molded into courage, and they still need our guidance at that time, but the guidance is different than it is when they're little. The Catholic Church said years ago, give us a child from the time they're 4 years old until they're 10 years old. Give us that child in that time period, and they'll always be a Catholic. Well, that's unless God gets hold of them. We know that. So, anyway, Daniel chapter 1 deals with Daniel and the 3 Hebrew children, which really, if you think about it, it's kind of amazing, because when you think about the 3 Hebrew children, their names, down in verse number 7, Daniel's name was changed to Belteshazzar. Hananiah was changed to Shadrach. Mishael was changed to Meshach. And Azariah was changed to Abednego. It's kind of interesting that we talk about Daniel, and we talk about Daniel as being Daniel, not by the name given to him by the Babylonians. But if I were to ask you who are the 3 Hebrew children, almost everybody here would say Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Well, that was not their Hebrew name. That was their Babylonian names. And I could get into what their names were, but if I do all of that, we're never going to get through with what we need to get through. So that's Daniel chapter 1. Daniel chapter 2, you have the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? You all know this story if you've been in church any time at all. Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and he goes to all of his musicians and soothsayers, and he says, look, I had a dream last night. I have no idea what it's about. And I need you to tell me what my dream was and then tell me what it means. And they said, well, tell us what it was, and then we'll tell you what it means. He said, I don't remember what it was, but I know it was bad. You ever have a bad dream that you couldn't remember what you dreamed, but you just knew it was bad? And that's kind of where he was. And they said, well, we can't do that. And so he decided, look, I'm gonna kill all these guys because they can't do what I'm paying them to do. And Daniel said, hold on a minute, give me a day. And Daniel took some time. Daniel said, give me some time. And so Daniel took some time, and he prayed, and God said, okay, here's the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. He dreamed of this great image, and it had a head of gold. It had a breast and arms of silver, and then it had a belly of brass, and then legs of iron, and feet mingled iron and clay. And he said, here's what all that means. What that means is, Nebuchadnezzar, this is 4 kingdoms, yours being the head of gold, and after you, there's going to come another kingdom. And then after that kingdom, there's going to come another kingdom. And after that kingdom, there's going to come a fourth kingdom, which is eventually destroyed by a fifth kingdom, which is a stone cut out of the mountains without hands. And so he said, that's what your dream was all about, Nebuchadnezzar. Didn't really get into a lot of detail about it, but what we know is that by studying history, that the head was Nebuchadnezzar, the silver was the Medes and Persians, which is when Israel was allowed to go back into the land, and then the brass was the Grecian Empire. Alexander the Great captured all the known world at the age of 33, and then killed himself because he didn't have anything else to do. And then the Roman Empire were the two legs of iron, and then the iron mingled with clay, and the 10 toes is that final European confederate that comes together to attack Israel during at the beginning of the or in the middle of the tribulation period, and the stone cut out of the mountains without hands was the kingdom of heaven, and Christ coming back and destroying all the kingdoms that have stood against him. That's basically what happens in Daniel chapter 2, okay? And I don't want to spend a lot of time there, but if you think about it, he mentions basically 3 earthly kingdoms, and then talks about the kingdom of the Antichrist that's coming at the end of all of that. But there's a lot of history that takes place in between those things, if you think about it. And we're going to get into that because I think Daniel lays out for us what happens in between as you get further into the book. Then you get to chapter 3. Chapter 3 is the 3 Hebrew children being cast into the fiery furnace. And if you have been around church at all, you know the story. Nebuchadnezzar got mad because they refused to pay homage to him, and he said, "Cast them into the fire," and the heat of the furnace, and those that cast them into the fire were burnt. And but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or by their Hebrew names, came out of the fire without even the smell of smoke on their garment. Carla and I last night were at the grocery store picking some stuff up, and she walked by these people and she said, "Good night, you smell them?" I said, "No." She said, "They're pot smokers." She said, "Man, they stink like a skunk," and that's basically, But the 3 Hebrew children went through the fire and didn't even have a smell of smoke on their clothes when they came out, and because God delivered them. And then you get into chapter 4. We're not going to spend a lot of time talking about chapter 3. Chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar has another dream. And this dream, he sees this great tree, and the tree is cut down, but the roots and the stump are left. And Daniel basically says, here's what that means, Nebuchadnezzar. You're going to have some guys that are going to drive you away from your kingdom. They're going to take your kingdom from you for a time, but you're going to come back. And during that time, Nebuchadnezzar went and spent time like an animal with the beasts of the field, eating grass and clawing dirt and scratching his belly with his hind leg like a dog. I mean, he literally became almost an animal, and then after that, one day he just came to his senses. And when he came to his senses, it's really interesting. If you look at chapter 4, just flip over there real quick. Chapter number 4, toward the end of the chapter, look at verse number 34. At the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up mine eyes unto heaven, and mine understanding returned unto me. And I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored him that liveth forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. And all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing, and he doeth according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand or say unto him, What doest thou? So in verses 28 through 33, it talks about Nebuchadnezzar being like a beast for 7 years, and then all of a sudden, after 7 years of being this madman, werewolf, Wolfman Jack, that's who he was like. How many of you remember Wolfman Jack, okay? So some of you young kids, you don't have any idea what you missed. He was like Wolfman Jack. And then all of a sudden, after 7 years, he gets his senses back. He just wakes up one day out in the middle of the woods, laying under a tree, and he wakes up one day and says, Hey, I'm Nebuchadnezzar. I'm the king of Babylon. I need to go back and sit on my throne. But when he did that, when his senses came back to him, he blessed the God of heaven. And he recognized God as eternal, and he recognized who God was, and he gave God glory for who he was. And that was because of Daniel's influence as a young man on the king. I'm going to tell you, you can have influence on people. I was talking to a guy not long ago. I went to visit him in the hospital, and I won't tell you who it was, but I went to visit this guy not long ago in the hospital, and he's in pretty bad shape. He was down, and he said, I just don't understand why God still has me here. I'm just no good for nothing. That was kind of his attitude. I've known a lot of people that begin to feel that way. And he said, I just don't feel like I'm any good for anything. And I had my New Testament with me and had a bunch of tracts in it. And I took my New Testament out, I took the tracts out, and I laid them down on the table. And I said, look, while you're in the hospital and while you think you're good for nothing, you're going to meet people that nobody else will be able to influence that you'll be able to influence. And I gave this guy, remember what our theme was last year? Where's your there? And there they preached the gospel. And I said, what you need to do is these nurses and doctors that come in to witness to you, look, don't be ashamed to tell them about Christ. That's your purpose. You're where you are so that you can give the gospel to somebody. Give them a tract, tell them how to be saved, witness to them. That's why you're here. You may not be able to go door to door. You may not be able to go to work tomorrow. You may not be able to have the influence like you've had in the past, but you can still have influence. Give them a tract. Left his hospital room. Got a text from him that night. He said, just wanted you to know, I gave a tract to a nurse that came in and witnessed to her, and she asked Christ to save her today. You know what? That's where you're where you are. That's why God has you where you are today, is because somebody that you will meet today needs the gospel that maybe nobody has ever shared the gospel with them. And if you'll take the opportunity to share it, that's why you're here. That's your purpose. And Daniel, being a young man, fulfilled his purpose, and Nebuchadnezzar came to glorify and honor the God of heaven. What a great story that is. We're going to keep moving, or we're never going to get done. Daniel chapter 5, you know the story. You ever heard about the handwriting on the wall? Man, I can read the handwriting on the wall. I can see what's coming. This is where that came from. Belshazzar had a big party. Everybody got drunk, and they were all excited. And all of a sudden, this hand comes out, and there's a finger, and it writes on the wall, and nobody could read what was written. Guess what? They go to Daniel. Daniel comes up, and he says, okay, I can read it. He prays, and God gives him the reading and the interpretation. And if you look in chapter 5 and go down to verse number 25, and this is the writing that was written, Mene, tekel, upharsin. This is the interpretation of the theme. Mene, God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Tekel, thou art found in the weight in the balances and found wanting. Perez, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. And then he dies. So Daniel said, I can tell you what's going to happen. You're done. God's done with you. That's chapter 5. You know that story. I'm not going to spend time talking about it because I got some stuff I want to get to. So that's chapter 5. Then you get chapter 6. Chapter 6, another real familiar story if you know anything about the Bible. Daniel's cast into the lion's den. Darius makes a decree. If you look down in verse number 7, all the presidents of the kingdom, the governors, the princes, the counselors, the captains have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save of thee, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. These guys were mad at Daniel, and so they got together, and they came up with this brilliant idea to make Darius feel good about himself, or Darius, there's two ways people pronounce it, to make this guy feel good about himself. Said, look, let's just put out a decree for 30 days. Nobody's allowed to make a petition to God or do anything. And when Daniel heard about it, he went and opened his window as he did, and he prayed 3. Look, he didn't change anything. He just began to pray the God of heaven 3 times a day like he always did, if you read on down. And the decree was such, look at verse number 8. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing that it be not changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which ordereth not. And so when the king of the Medes and Persians signed something into law, it could not be changed or altered. It had to stay in effect. And the king didn't realize really what he was doing because he liked Daniel. And he signed the decree, and now it had to happen. And so they took Daniel, and they cast him into the lion's den. And Daniel used Leo the lion as a pillow that night. And the next day, Darius wakes up and runs. He worried all night long about what was going to happen to Daniel. He goes to the lion den, looks down inside and said, Daniel, how's it going? Daniel said, man, I had a good night's sleep. Everything's good. I'm ready for another great day. Because God, look, what's going to happen? You're going to end up in your life as a Christian. You're going to end up, because Satan, as a roaring lion, walks about seeking whom he may devour, according to Peter. And if that's who he is, I want you to understand that you're going to end up in the lion's den at times in your life, and that's okay as long as you take the Lion of the tribe of Judah with you. Because the Lion of the tribe of Judah is Christ. And so I think that's probably what happened. I'd say there probably Christ came down and said, hey, you big lion, go over and lay down. You little lion, you go over there and lay down. This is my man Daniel, and you're not going to touch him. God protected Daniel in the lion's den. Not going to get into that. Don't have time. Chapter 7. Chapter 7 is a great chapter. Chapter 7 probably one of the most misunderstood chapters in the Bible. If you read most prophecy guides, and I've read a bunch of them. I mean, I've read all kind of books on Daniel chapter 7. And what they try to do is to try to make Daniel chapter 7 a repeat of Daniel chapter 2 and the 5 kingdoms that are mentioned in Daniel chapter 2. Remember we talked about them? Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, the revived Roman Empire at the end, and then Christ and his kingdom. But look at verse 17 of Daniel chapter 7. And I'm going to tell you why I don't think that's so. It says these great, because he talks about beasts. He talks about an eagle. He talks about a bear. He talks about a lion. A lion, a bear, and a leopard. And then he talks about a fourth beast down in verse number 7. But notice what it says in verse number 17. These great beasts, which are four kings, which shall arise out of the earth. Basically what he's saying there is these are four kingdoms that are going to come that haven't come as of yet. You get that? These four kingdoms which shall arise. They haven't arose yet. So it can't be a repeat of what was in Daniel chapter 2. Because Babylon was already there and it wasn't something that was going to arise. I'm gonna this is my opinion, okay? I could be wrong. But I don't think I am. Now I'm gonna give you my opinion. And there are people that agree with me. I searched and found two people. No, I didn't. I found a lot of people that agree with me on this, and so let me just give it to you. The nation. So Rome really ruled the world until about 1500 A.D. So you had Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. Rome, right before Christ, Rome took power, and they ruled from then until about 1500 B.C. After 1500 B.C., there was a nation that arose that has as their symbol, animal symbol of that nation, their symbol was a lion. And that nation ruled from about 1500 to the early 1900s. After World War I, that nation really began to divest of its power, and that nation is the nation of England. England was a world power, and they used to say the sun never sets on the kingdom of England, because they ruled the world, man. I mean, they had just everything. And it's really kind of amazing when you think about it, because they weren't much. They were kind of a small little place, an island. And so I believe that the lion in verse number 4 is England. And it says, notice what it says. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. And then it says, I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked. Let me ask you something. What nation do you know of that has as its animal symbol an eagle? That would kind of be us, wouldn't it? And what happened in 1776? The wings of the eagle were plucked off of the lion. We declared our independence, and we won the Revolutionary War. Now, you say, well, that's crazy. Look, I don't think God just knew what was happening from Babylon to Rome. I believe God knew what was going to happen from Rome until the kingdom of Christ was established. Okay? So, we have there in verse number 4, England. I think it's England. Then you go to the second part of that. From after the First World War to about 1980, the dominant world power, one of the most dominant powers, they really devoured much land, and their symbol is a bear. And that nation is Russia. Remember what happened in the 80s? In the 80s, Ronald Reagan, who in my opinion, you can differ with me, as the greatest president this country's ever had, because he got rid of the Soviet dominion. When he stood there in Germany and said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, and the Soviet bloc, boom, it was gone. And all those nations declared independence. And there were all these, and you know, Russia is not the power that it once was anymore. It raised up on one side, this bear, it says it raised up on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it. Bear raised up on one side. What happened is Russia kind of always went dominant toward the east and the southeast in its conquering. It never went the other directions at all. Didn't need to. Raised up on one side. Well, so I believe really Russia had 1/3 of the world's population under the domination of communism from about 1920 something, late 1910 teens to early 1920s, all the way to 1980 when the Soviet bloc was destroyed. So I believe that was Russia. And then you come down to the next beast. After this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon its back 4 wings of a fowl, and the beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. A leopard is an interesting animal. Stay with me. Do you know that a leopard has basically 3 colors, right? Has a white belly, it has a yellow back, and black spots. Do you know that when Noah came off the ark, he had 3 sons? And those 3 sons went 3 different directions. Ham went to the south and became the father of the African people. Japheth went to the north and became the European and the white race. And Shem was the Jewish people and the olive-skinned people, the yellow-skinned people that migrated to the east from where the ark landed. Do you know there's a country today that's called the melting pot? It's us. We're the country in the world that accepts the whites from Europe, the blacks from Africa, and the yellow skin or olive skin people from the Middle East. Pretty interesting. And so basically what God does is he lays out for us. If you go on down, look down at verse number 7. I saw in the night vision, behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, strong and exceeding, and it had great iron teeth, and it devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue at the feet of it, and it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. These 10 horns go back to the 10 toes of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and these 10 horns, 3 of the horns. Look at verse 8. I consider the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. So 3 of them went away. This little horn comes up, and that little horn, don't have time to develop all of this, but goes into the Antichrist. And then if you go down to verse number 9, and that's the Antichrist kingdom of the 10-nation federation headed up by the Antichrist in verse number 8. Verse number 9, I beheld till the thrones were cast down, the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow. This is the stone hewn out of the mountain without hands that was cast at the feet of Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. It's Christ coming back. So basically what happens is this is interesting. Talks about the 10 horns and the 10 toes, right? You got that? That's at the end time. Basically what happens is the kingdoms of the world come together against the nation of Israel in the end time. Do you realize that there have been 10 dominant nations in history from the beginning till now that have stood against Israel? Nimrod in chapter 10 of Genesis, Pharaoh, Sennacherib, then you had Babylon, then you had the Medes and the Persians, then you had Greece, then you had Rome, then you had England, then you had Russia, and now you have the good old U.S. of A. And do you know what's happening in our nation right now? And when we get to Obadiah, I'll show you this. What's happening in our nation right now is that the United States of America as a people are seeing a people that are turning their back on God's people, the nation of Israel. And when you turn your back on God's people, the nation of Israel, that's the straw that breaks the camel's back in God's time frame. And when that all comes to fruition, God's going to take all those 10 kingdoms, those 10 horns, and the kingdom of God is going to come and crush all of those kingdoms, and the kingdoms of this world will become the kingdoms of our God, and we'll live on earth in peace for 1,000 years. Amen. Woo, what a history lesson. That's chapter 7, okay? I wanted to get to that because I just think that's pretty cool. Okay, chapter 8. Chapter 8 goes from Persia to Greece. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it, but it goes from Persia to Greece and also goes into the Antichrist time. Chapter 9 is a really important chapter. It talks about the 70 weeks of Daniel. And I'm going to give you some references. Don't have time to go through them all. But Daniel says 70 weeks are determined upon thy people in chapter 9, verse 24, and upon the holy city. So 70 weeks, if you look at the book of Ezekiel, you remember we talked about Ezekiel laying on his left side for 390 days, which represented 390 years, and he laid on his left side or right side for 40 days, which represented 40 years. And if you go back to Genesis, I think chapter 34, where Jacob was serving Laban for Rachel, and after he got done serving for Rachel, he got Leah, and then Laban said, well, you got to marry the oldest one before you can have the youngest one, and he said, fulfill her week. That week was 7 years, and then he got Rachel. So a week is 7 years in Bible time. And so 70 weeks is 490 years, and this is going to be about as simple as you'll ever hear this. 490 years, and if you read on down in that, so we're talking 490 years that determine upon God's people. And then look in verse 25. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks, 62 weeks, so 483 years is in chapter 25. That's 7 weeks, 62 weeks. The streets, and then after that, after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, not for himself. So to the first coming of Christ, in those verses, 483 years, there's a 7-week period of time there's a 1 week period of time or 7 years that's yet to be determined. And in between that 483rd year and 490th year, they would, this is crazy, but in between that time, there's what's called the mystery of the church, which is talked about in Ephesians chapter 5. Paul talked about the church being a mystery. That's the period of time we're living in. And then the last week is the tribulation period, and which takes place after the church is raptured. And then Christ comes and establishes his kingdom. Okay? That's pretty good. That's about as simple as I can make it in 5 minutes, and probably as complicated as I can leave your head spinning in that period of time. Then you get chapter 10. Chapter 10 is a great chapter. If you read about it, chapter 10 talks about Daniel's prayer life. Daniel's praying, and for 3 weeks he doesn't eat, he doesn't drink, he's fasting, he's praying, he's burdened, and then all of a sudden this fella shows up, named let me find it. Look at verse number 12. Then said he unto me, Fear not, Daniel, from the first day that thou didst set thine heart to understand and chasten thyself before God, thy words were heard, and I am come for thy word. Daniel been praying for 3 weeks, and during this time he just couldn't get an answer, but this guy says, look, from the minute you began to pray, this angel said, from the minute you began to pray, I was coming with the answer, but the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me, and he's talking about satanic, demonic influence. There's a battle going on around us today that we can't even see, and if you really want to get in a battle for God, get into the place of prayer, and that's what happened. And just a couple references to throw at you with that. He said, I had to call Michael, and Michael came and helped me. Let me just give you some references you can look at later. 2 Samuel 5:24, 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 7, Jude chapter 9. When Michael was contending with the devil about the body of Moses, he couldn't. The devil withstood him, and he had to pray and said, "The Lord rebuke thee." And so that's satanic opposition to prayer. I got a minute and 40 seconds. Let's get through this. Chapter 11. Chapter 11 is the gathering of the European nations against the nation of Israel. And then chapter 12 wraps it all up. And there are just a couple things in chapter 12 that I really love. It talks about the last half of the tribulation, or the great tribulation period, in chapter 7, or verse 7 and verse number 11. And then I love verse number 4. But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words. Wait a minute, chapter 3, verse 3, I'm sorry. And they that be wise shall shine at the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness, the stars forever and ever. You want to shine for God, turn many to righteousness. Book of Proverbs 11:30 says, he that the fruit of the righteous tree of life, he that winneth souls is wise. Look, in order for you, everybody wants to understand the book of Revelation. The truth of the matter is, I don't know that we'll really ever totally get it until we're with the Lord. But I can guarantee you this, you won't get anything out of it unless you understand Daniel. Because Daniel, you've got to understand Daniel to understand Revelation. And I'll say this, you can't understand Daniel without understanding Revelation. The two books go hand in hand. You'll see the number 10, the number 7. You'll see all of those things appearing over and over again. And then I've got at the end of my outline here, I've got Christ in the book of Daniel. You can look at that and follow that, and it goes on the back page. Listen, Daniel is a unbelievably phenomenal book, and I hope you'll fall in love with it like I have. So anyway, that's the book of Daniel in 45 minutes. Let's pray, okay? Father, we love you. Thank you for your goodness. Pray that you'll bless our service to follow. Give our preacher your power. Lord, help us to be, as Daniel, standing against the world that is opposed to us. Having done all to stand, help us to take on the whole armor of God. Lord, I pray that you'll give us all that we need today and glorify your Son in Christ's name. Lord, bless you. Thank you.